A reading from the letter to the Hebrews. In the days when Christ Jesus was in the flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And when he was made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Of all the mysteries of the Rosary, I've always been drawn to Christ's agony in the garden. There's something so viscerally human about Jesus late at night, alone, abandoned by his friends, in so much anguish that his sweat turns to blood. The weight of all humanity is on his shoulders as he says, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." It's a far cry from the stoic, unbloody images of Christ's passion that we so often see. This reading from the letter to the Hebrews has an interesting way of describing Christ's prayer to the Father. It says that he prayed to the one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard. But he wasn't spared from death. He had to drink from the cup that the Father had given him. So how was his prayer answered? We have this unfortunate tendency in Christianity to draw too hard a line between the Incarnation and the Paschal mystery. From Christmas on the one hand and Good Friday on the other. When Christ became man, it wasn't just about taking on a human body. It was about shedding himself of his divine prerogatives. Having done that, he was in a position to learn through the human experience. What began at Bethlehem would be brought to completion at Gethsemane and Calvary. Surely in his infinite power, God could have saved us in some other way. But in his infinite mercy, God chose this way. Because in the experience of his earthly life, Christ left us an example from which we can learn how to live in this world. And at the end of his life, all of this came to a head. Christ was torn between self-preservation on the one hand and his divine mission on the other. And it's the kind of thing that we have to deal with every day, in big and small ways in our own lives. We certainly don't have to look very hard. Think of the people of South Florida. About 6 weeks ago, they watched over a dozen children get gunned down at school. And just this week, they watched one of their bridges fall into traffic, killing several more. And the world has no answers for this sort of suffering. This isn't like boot camp or football practice. There's no easy purpose for all of this. So what are we supposed to say? As far as the world's message goes, I'm reminded of the late Christopher Hitchens. He famously criticized the practices of Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity. In one of his books, he's talking about this institution, and he says that its purpose is not the honest relief of suffering, but the promulgation of a cult based on death and suffering and subjection. And by the world's logic, Hitchens is entirely right. Because throughout our history, Christians have this odd trait. Rather than run from our sufferings, we hold fast to them. We lean into them. Rather than the path of Dr. Kevorkian, we choose that of Teresa of Avila, who famously told God, "If this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few." And she persevered anyway. No, our primary task is not to end the suffering of the world, but to participate in the world's salvation. Now, to be fair, we don't have any easy answers for ourselves either. There's no silver bullet that's going to make all the pain go away. But we do have something far greater than easy relief. We have a loving relationship with a God who is always by our side. Now, to Mr. Hitchens' credit, in the same book, he does allow Mother Teresa to speak for herself. And she describes what she told a cancer patient who was dying in excruciating agony. What she told him was this: "You are suffering like Christ on the cross, so Jesus must be kissing you." Brothers, isn't that what Lent is all about? Not the suffering itself, that's not the point. But Lent is about allowing ourselves not to be controlled by worldly circumstances, and thereby grow in obedience and virtue. Now, we're about 3/4 of the way through this Lenten season, and maybe we've been faithful to the resolutions we've made last month, or maybe we haven't. But there are still 11 days between today and Holy Thursday when we'll remember Jesus' prayer in the garden. In the meantime, as we heard in the Gospel today, we can't be satisfied with half conversions. I think a lot of us come into religious life as these really robust, tall stalks of wheat. And we think we're great. We have all of our own gifts, we have our own talents, our own aspirations for the future. But loving God as a large stalk is only half the battle, and the second half will take the rest of our lives. We have to allow ourselves to die in order to bear fruit. In order to be saved from death, we have to undergo death. In order to experience the resurrection, we have to experience the cross. So yes, Jesus' prayer in the garden to the Father was answered. But it wasn't the first part, the prayer that his cup would pass from him. No, it was what he said next that made the difference. And so this is our prayer too. Not my will, but yours be done.